30 pieces of wood run in from the rim of a cartwheel and meet at one thick, round hub in the middle. Here is the whole sentence from chapter 11. The 30 spokes unite in the one nave. And then the point, which is that none of that is what makes a wheel work. What makes it work is the empty hole bored through the middle of the hub, where the axle goes. The spokes are the part you can see. The hole is the part that turns. I want to start here because of what this argument is made of. It is made of a wheel. You could walk out to a cart and put your hand on it. The book is the Tao Te Ching. It is 81 very short chapters, and in the translation I am reading, it runs a little over 10,000 words, shorter than a single chapter of most of the books on this channel. Its first line famously refuses to define its own subject. The Tao that can be trodden is not the enduring and unchanging Tao. So people file it under mysticism, and then quote it on posters. And here is my argument, which I can put a number on. This is not a book of abstractions. It is a book of objects: wheels, clay pots, doorways, bellows, water, tree sprouts, an over-sharpened knife, an infant's face. And the English language version of it, the one you have actually met, has had every single object taken out. Today, in 20 minutes, I'm reading the Tao Te Ching in James Legge's translation of 1891. The most quoted book in the world about nothing is, in the original, almost entirely about things. 6 sentences do most of the work of representing this book in English. You have seen all of them. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. Nature does not hurry, yet everything is accomplished. Knowing others is intelligence, knowing yourself is true wisdom. A good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent on arriving. Being deeply loved by someone gives you strength. I searched the translation I am using for all 6 of them. Not one of them is in the book. 0 hits, all 6. 5 of them appear to come from a 1988 version by Stephen Mitchell, which is openly a rewriting rather than a translation from the Chinese, and which is the single most circulated English Tao Te Ching there has ever been. The 6th I could not trace to anything at all. I want to be fair to Mitchell for a moment because he never hid what he was doing. His book is openly a version rather than a translation, made without reading classical Chinese, and it is often beautiful. The problem is not that it exists. The problem is that it became the text. That when somebody says Laozi in English, this is overwhelmingly what they are quoting, and it has been sanded down until nothing in it has a shape. And the first one, the famous one, the one on the poster in every office in the world, is a rewrite of a sentence that does exist. Here is what it actually says. The journey of 1,000 li commenced with a single step. A li, not a mile. Commenced, not begins. Now count the objects in those 6 famous sentences. A journey, a step, plans, strength, wisdom. There is no wheel, no pot, no water, no tree. There is nothing in any of them you could pick up. Almost every chapter of this book is about something you could pick up and hold, and the 6 most quoted Laozi lines in English do not contain a single object between them. So what exactly got lost on the way? Clay gets pushed around a wheel until it becomes a pot, and the author makes the wheel argument again with the pot. Clay is fashioned into vessels, and then the same turn. But it is on their empty hollowness that their use depends. You did not buy a cup, you bought a hole with a handle on it. And then, in the same short chapter, he does it a 3rd time, with a building. Doors and windows, he says, are cut out of the walls to make a room, and what you use is the part that was removed. 3 objects, one after another, making one point: a wheel, a pot, a wall. I find the repetition itself worth noticing because it tells you what kind of book this is. He does not state the principle and then illustrate it. He hands you 3 things and lets the principle arrive on its own. That is a teaching method, and it is the opposite of a slogan. A slogan gives you the conclusion and skips the object. And this is a very practical thought once it is unwrapped from the mysticism. What in your work is the spokes, And what is the whole? Almost every organization I have ever seen measures the spokes, the visible parts, the countable parts, the parts you can put in a report, and quietly runs on the whole. The slack, the unassigned afternoon, the person with no title who knows how everything actually connects. Then a reorganization fills in the whole to make the wheel look more solid, and the wheel stops turning. So which parts of your week are the spokes, and which part is the whole? The honest test is simple. If somebody audited your calendar, which entries would you have to defend? Those are the spokes. The thing you would find hardest to justify is very often the thing everything else is turning on. A blacksmith's bellows sits on the floor of a workshop. A wooden box with a handle full of nothing. That is the image Chapter 5 reaches for, and the way it is set down is worth hearing whole, because Legge puts it into verse and keeps the old contracted form. "'Tis emptied, yet it loses not its power. 'Tis moved again, and sends forth air the more. Squeeze it flat and it is not used up. Pull it open and there is more air than before." This is the fourth object in a row making the same case, and I think the bellows is the best of them, because it fixes a problem the pot and the wheel leave open. With the pot, you might think emptiness is just absence. The pot is useful because nothing is in the way. The bellows is different. The bellows does work. It is not passive space. It is a mechanism whose entire function is that it can be empty and then not empty. Have you ever come back from a week with nothing in it and got more done in the following 3 days than in the previous month? That is not rest as recovery from work. That is the bellows. The emptiness is where the power comes from, not a pause between exertions. Every productivity system I have ever tried treats the empty box as the thing to be eliminated. This one treats it as the engine. And notice that the bellows only works because it is closed on the other 3 sides. Emptiness on its own is not the point. A field is empty and does nothing. What the chapter is actually describing is a bounded emptiness, a space with a shape round it, which is what lets the air go somewhere. Unstructured free time does not do this. A protected afternoon with a wall round it does. Which of yours is which? Somebody fills a jar right up to the rim and then tries to pick it up and walk with it. Chapter 9 opens on that, and it is a sentence about carrying, not about greed. It is better to leave a vessel unfilled than to attempt to carry it when it is full. Not better to own less, better to fill less because a full one cannot be moved without spilling. Anyone who has ever tried to carry a mug across an office knows the exact physical fact he is pointing at. Then, in the next breath, a second workshop object, and this one is sharper. If you keep feeling a point that has been sharpened, the point cannot long preserve its sharpness. You keep testing the edge with your thumb, and the testing is what dulls it. I think that is the most quietly devastating line in the book about self-improvement, and nobody quotes it, because it does not fit on a mug, and because it is about the mug. The thing you keep checking is the thing you are wearing out, the metrics review that eats the work. The relationship you keep asking, is this working? And then the third object in the chapter, which is the one about wealth. When gold and jade fill the hall, their possessor cannot keep them safe. Not gold is bad. Gold filling the hall cannot be guarded, a fact about volume and doors, not a moral. 3 objects, 3 failures, and every one of them is a failure of too much rather than of wanting. Water runs downhill and settles in the place everybody else has already refused. Chapter 8 is the one people do quote, but they quote the opening clause and drop the reason. Here is the reason. The excellence of water appears in its benefiting all things, and in its occupying without striving, and then the part that gives it teeth. The low place which all men dislike. That is not a nature metaphor about being gentle, it is a claim about position. Water is excellent because it goes to the spot nobody is competing for, and from there it reaches everything. Now, is that wisdom? Or is it just a losing strategy dressed up? I want to take the objection seriously, because it is the objection the whole book keeps inviting. Every version of this idea I have seen in an English self-help context turns it into a license not to try, which is obviously not what a book advising rulers is doing. Here is the reading that makes it work. The low place is not the worst position, it is the unclaimed one. The tedious internal system nobody wants to own, the customer nobody senior wants to call, the documentation. Those are low places, and the people who take them end up connected to everything, because everything flows downhill into them eventually. That is not humility as a virtue, that is humility as an infrastructure decision, and it comes with a real cost, which the book does not mention, and I will. The low place is unclaimed for a reason. Nobody is promoted out of it, and the credit for what flows through it lands somewhere else. So the honest version of the advice is not that the low place is secretly better. It is that the low place is where the leverage is, and that you have to decide whether you want the leverage or the credit. Which have you been choosing? Water sits against a stone for a long time, and the stone loses. Chapter 78 puts both halves of that in one sentence. There is nothing in the world more soft and weak than water, and yet, for attacking things that are firm and strong, there is nothing that can take precedence of it. And chapter 43 says the same thing with a verb that is much less polite than people expect. The softest thing in the world dashes against and overcomes the hardest. Dashes against, not yields to, not flows around, it attacks. I want to be careful here, because this is the point where this book gets turned into a fortune cookie. The claim is not that soft things are morally better. The claim is about timescale. Over one afternoon, the stone wins every single time. Over a century, the stone is gone and the water is still there and has not changed at all. So the sentence is only true if you are prepared to be measured on the century, and almost nothing in a human life is. Which is, I think, the honest difficulty with this whole book, and it is worth saying rather than smoothing over. Its advice is correct on a time scale longer than the one you are being assessed on. Your quarter is not a century. Your illness is not a century. The book knows this, and says so in the very next line. Everybody in the world knows the soft overcomes the hard, and nobody is able to act on it. He puts his hand on a newborn and then on a corpse, and reports the difference in one sentence. Man at his birth is supple and weak, at his death, firm and strong. Then he checks it against a second kingdom of things, which is how you can tell he means it as an observation rather than a saying. Trees and plants, in their early growth, are soft and brittle. At their death, dry and withered. And then the conclusion, which reverses everything the words strong and weak normally do. Firmness and strength are the concomitants of death. Softness and weakness, the concomitants of life. Rigidity is not a sign of health. It is what happens to a thing that has stopped being alive. You can test this on anything with a body. A young branch bends and springs back. A dead one snaps. And you can test it on things without a body, which is what makes the chapter useful. An organization that can no longer change its mind about anything is not disciplined. It is dry. A person who has become entirely consistent, every opinion settled, every reaction predictable, has not achieved integrity. What is the last thing you changed your mind about, and how long ago was it? That question is a stiffness test, and the answer is diagnostic in exactly the way this chapter says it is. A tree so thick you cannot get your arms round it started as a shoot you could have pulled up with 2 fingers. That is the beginning of chapter 64, and it is the passage the whole world knows, except that the world knows 1/3 of it. Here is the first image, verbatim. The tree which fills the arms grew from the tiniest sprout. Then the second. A tower 9 stories high, he says, rose from a heap of earth. And only then the third, which is the one that survived. The journey of 1,000 li commenced with a single step. 3 objects, a tree, a mound of soil, a footprint. The English version keeps the last one, converts li into miles, changes commenced into begins, and drops the tree and the tower entirely. And look at what goes when they go. The surviving version is about starting. Take the first step, you will get there. It is an encouragement. The full passage is not an encouragement. It is about scale and about time, that enormous things are made of tiny things, which cuts both ways because the chapter's actual advice is to deal with trouble while it is still a sprout. The poster says, begin. The book says, intervene early, because later the tree fills your arms. There is a related list 2 chapters earlier that has had the same thing done to it. The partial becomes complete, the crooked, straight, the empty, full, the worn out, new, bent, hollow, worn out. 3 damaged physical things offered as starting conditions rather than as problems. A ruler is graded in Chapter 17, and the grading is done entirely by what the people underneath happen to feel. The best rank is the one where the population does not know the ruler is there at all. Then, in Legge's words, comes everybody else. In the next age they loved them and praised them. In the next they feared them. In the next they despised them. Read the order carefully because it contains something almost nobody says out loud. Being loved and praised is the second rank. Not the first, second. A leader everyone admires has already slipped one place because being admired means being noticed, and being noticed means the work is visibly theirs rather than the group's. I have never seen that idea in a management book, and I have seen the opposite in most of them. The related image is in Chapter 61, where a large state is told to behave like the low-lying, down-flowing part of a river, the place everything drains into. And the chapter ends on a line that is startling for a text of its age. The female always overcomes the male by her stillness. Stillness as a method of winning, offered without any suggestion that it is a consolation prize. And notice again what the argument is built out of. Not a principle of leadership. A river, and which end of it you stand at. There is a test buried in that ranking that anybody can run on themselves. Think about the last thing your team did well. When you describe it out loud, whose name is the subject of the sentence? If it is yours, you are in the second rank at best. Loved and praised perhaps, but visible. The first rank does not get described at all, which is exactly why nobody wants it, and why the ranking is more uncomfortable than it first looks. In the middle of the book, the author stops instructing anybody and describes his own face. Chapter 20 is unlike everything around it. There is no wheel in it, no water, no advice. Everyone else, he says, is bright and satisfied, as if at a great feast or climbing a tower in spring, and then, I am like an infant which has not yet smiled. An infant that has not yet learned the expression. Not sad, pre-social. Nothing arranged on the face yet. And it continues, I look dejected and forlorn, as if I had no home to go to. And then the line that made me want to do this episode. The multitude of men all have enough and to spare. I alone seem to have lost everything. I have never once seen that quoted. It is the least usable passage in the book. You cannot put it on a mug, you cannot open a talk with it, and it does not make the person quoting it look wise. But it is the only place where the writer appears in his own book. And what he says is that following this has cost him. So here is where I land after 5,000 words of objects. This is not a serene book. It is a practical one written by somebody who sounds tired, using the things in front of him, a wheel, a pot, a bellows, a jar, a blade, a river, a sprout. Because those things do not require you to already agree. The version we got in English kept the calm and threw away the workshop. Go and look at a wheel. The argument is still lying there in the middle of it, and if you want one test for whether a version of this book is worth reading, it is not the prose, and it is not the reputation of the translator. Open it anywhere and count the nouns. If a page goes by without a single thing you could pick up, somebody has done to it exactly what was done to the tree and the tower.